Next up in the Dukascopy TV studio, I'm joined by Jean-François Owczarczak of MJT to discuss some of your favourite pairs and what pricing action we can expect in the coming weeks. Jean-François, thank you so much for coming in today.
Thank you very much, Natalie. Thanks for having me back.
Now, we're going to be taking a look at the dollar pairs as usual today. Now, I'm going to bring it up, tapering. It's something we've been talking about for months and months and months. Have all of the efforts and expectations been priced in already, or can we expect more? Okay,
well, basically the way to look at tapering first is the direct consequences on the Treasury bonds futures that we have here on the weekly. And basically, if we look at the chart here, it's still in the bear market over the long term, and it's still within what we call a correction down. It hasn't turned impulsive yet. It's not a secular move yet, but it's been a very strong move since mid last year and renewed since mid the second quarter. Now, if we focus on this chart here, which is the 10-year Treasuries chart, you see the weekly, the daily, and the hourly. And the first thing you can say is that all trends are still negative over the long term, the medium term, and the short term. And as we just mentioned, the weekly chart is still heading down within this correction zone here. Now, if we look at the daily, we're slowly getting into zones which are quite oversold, and I'm probably going to focus on this. I mean, we've done our whole move down over the last few months, and our risk index is now well into the green, well into the oversold territory. The envelopes are touching each other, which is also a sign of stress. And our targets down have been reached, and the time expected for that move down is almost completed. So we believe, although if we focus out on the weekly, there's still some potential down, and we only looking at an intermediate situation, we believe that short term we have reached a point of an intermediate bottom, and that most of the tapering effect has been anticipated or is in the prices now. So that should give us a bit of a relief on the sell-off of most risky assets that we've seen. And also, if we expand a bit, and let's go back to the mosaic, could perhaps be positive for the dollar.
Okay, what other news have you got for us then with the dollar pairs this week?
Basically, I'm quickly going to focus also on the S&P. S&P has had quite a run over the last 4 years, but more importantly over the last year or so. Tapering did put in some slowing down of the pace of this move up, but we believe it's not finished, and that there's probably at least one more leg into this move up. And as you can see, our targets, although we are on quite high levels of risk, still point to a bit more potential. Probably over an immediate effect over the next month or so. We do expect an intermediate top at least towards October, but possibly until the early next year. Now, to reinitiate this move up, our hourlies show us here, we've had the correction down that we saw over the month of August, and we've slowly made our way up since then. Now, this move has not turned impulsive yet, and so I cannot confirm that this acceleration has indeed started, but it would start if we were able to make it above the 1670.54 here, which is the higher end of our corrective targets, and which at the moment acts as an important resistance. Now, turning to currencies, well, basically our view at the beginning of these tapering talks was that, well, high interest rates in the US, that's going to be great for US dollar, etc. Well, basically the opposite happened, because what we didn't really expect is that people selling treasury bonds did have to find a safe haven for their funds, and a lot of them went to Europe to seek for opportunities. And so the euro was quite strong over the whole summer as a result of this effect. Now, if we look at the trends, and you have the euro dollar here and the US dollar Swiss here, well, basically we're still very much in neutral territory over the weekly charts here, which are the horizon over the next few quarters. Basically, the euro is in a bull but has no targets, which means the targets are negative, which means that there's a discrepancy here. And the Swiss franc is in a bear but also has no targets. So basically, it's a long-term sideways that we are looking at here, and we're just waiting to have as much clues as to which way it's really going to break out. So one first clue that we may have is that pound sterling, the cable, is still heading down at the moment, and it has been quite well synchronized with the euro. Australian dollar is also still a negative against the US dollar, although we can see quite a lot of exaggeration here, and it's probably, if we quickly focus on it, because some of our viewers may be interested, we're also getting into quite a lot of exaggeration here, and so hence an intermediate correction up is in the making at the moment.
And we'll come on to gold shortly, but this also ties in well with commodity movements at present.
We could jump to it quite quickly. If we go to gold, although it's still negative over the longer term with our weekly charts here, the dailies have made an intermediate bottom end of August and are correcting up. Now, we believe that if this is only a correction, the move is pretty much done. I mean, we've been able to bounce off the envelopes and make it up to the higher end of our corrective targets. So, if our weekly charts are still very negative, the most probable scenario now is one of indecision over the next month or so, and then resuming the downtrend. Now, what would be a contradictory sign to that, and a very positive sign for gold, is that if we could make it above the 1421.91 here and start an impulsive move up on gold. But that's not the case yet. And so in that respect, we will keep our negative stance over the longer term. Now back to a mosaic and back to the dollar. Well, another positive sign for the dollar is that dollar yen has held up very, very well. And at the moment, we're still looking at some more progression over the next quarter or so. And if you look here, next few quarters also. If you look at the weekly chart here, well, nice intermediate top here. The risk hasn't really gone down, but the targets are still pointing towards above the 110 level. Now, if you look at the daily, well, there was a consolidation, but it was very, very shallow. And so very, very shallow consolidation in what is still an uptrend. Well, it's probably not much more potential at the moment, but you do see that there's a bit more on the weekly. But a shallow consolidation, when it ends, usually continues in the direction of the trend. And that trend is on the go on the hourly, and there's probably a bit more to go over the next week, 10 days. Now, if we go back to the mosaic, and we're going to finish on euro dollar, and basically euro dollar, well, still quite neutral on the long term. We initiated a bull trend here. It really hasn't gone very far. It hasn't been able to create an impulsive up move. Now, with the recent price action, the corrective price move is put into doubt, i.e. we don't have any targets here. And so we may starting to be in a resume downtrend situation. It's not clear yet, so we have to focus on the daily to get a bit more clues.
It's interesting that there's been almost no reaction to last week's ECB meeting.
Well, I mean, also the employment figures. Basically, well, a bit of reaction that we're going to see over the short term, because we're going to have a look at the trader's view, but nothing really widespread. Basically, the US economy is growing a bit slower than expected, but it's still growing, and people need more clues to really take a stance on it at the moment. But if you see here, what we've seen since the month of April is basically a correction up on the euro. It never really has been able to make it into impulsive territory, and so at the moment we'll have to label it only as a correction. And basically the recent weakness does point that we might be in the situation of a resumed downtrend on the euro. As said, the weekly is not very clear. The euro dollar is not very clear yet. It's basically up in a correction. Maybe this correction is weakening, so we have to move to the hourly to try to get a bit more clues. And for the time being, the hourly is heading down, and we think there's another 10 days to go, and it could lead us back below 131. We are in strong exaggeration here. There's been a bit of reaction here, but for the time being, it's not anything that is strong enough to put our trend into doubt.
We'll be able to see next week if it hits that 10-day target.
Exactly.
Jean-François, thank you so much for coming in today.
Thank you for having me.
That's all we've got time for right now. Jean-François will be back next week, so we can take a look at those euro-dollar performances. For now, though, goodbye.